Welcome everyone to Color Commentary. We are your Pauper commentators, Michael Pejic and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
Oh, Mike, pretty good. How about yourself?
Good. I addressed this in the pre-show, but I got a new desk. I feel very professional today. We're gonna have a very polished and smooth podcast. I can feel it. But first, we got to get through our upkeep stuff. First off, as every week, we are brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art is a variety of tokens, playmats, dice bags, and art prints from throughout the history of Magic and the world at large. So if you're looking for any of those things to spruce up your Magic playing experience, you can check them out over at originalmagicart.store. And if you use /commentary, that'll let them know that we sent you, and it'll, help us out. You can also use the affiliate code Commontary, all caps, when you're checking out, and you'll get 10% off your order. And we get a little bit of a kickback. So win-win. Everyone gets something out of that deal. And Commentary is, of course, spelled as is the name of this podcast. Adrian, what do you have for us this week?
Well, Mike, I call that a classic win-win-win. But we are also brought in part from listeners like you. Just for $1 an episode, or just as little as $1 an episode, you can hear the full show, including our amazing pre- and post shows, and get access to our patron-exclusive Discord channel, where it's always a great time. This week, we did talk about certain Nintendo characters.
Yeah, I think that's as much as we can
that's
say.
as much as I'm willing to say. The rest you got to pay for.
All right.
What are we talking about today, Mike?
So you found a little deck. I'm not sure where you found it. I'm guessing Reddit.
Yes, Honeybear77 submitted his or her deck for feedback. Is a maybe not for feedback, but really just into the aether. A deck that is black-white Aristocrats pre-Hunted Witness. So for those of you who remember, Hunted Witness is a new card coming in Guilds of Ravnica. It is a W for a 1/1, and when it dies, you get a 1/1 soldier maybe. Yes. With lifelink.
Yes, it's a 1/1 soldier with lifelink. I think that's the de facto 1/1 token for this set. And we had even commented in that episode that there wasn't an existing shell for this, because we were like, you could put this in a black-white Aristocrats deck, but that doesn't really exist. And here we go again, setting those land speed records and being proven wrong. Here we are.
Do pretty good. We're pretty good at it. And then a little bit later, we were planning another discussion topic, but we can get there when we get there. You want me to go ahead and start on the list?
Yeah, and as we go, we'll kind of talk about, more traditionally, when you see these lists, they're black-green, and we can talk about perhaps the benefits and differences between the two as we go.
Correct. So right off the bat, we've got our first white creature, Benevolent Bodyguard, which is already played in the Rally Gone deck in order to protect the combo. It is W for a 1/1 human cleric. Sacrifice Benevolent Bodyguard. Target creature you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. Mike, I am not the biggest fan of creatures that sacrifice to themselves in an Aristocrats deck. Opinion?
So as we mentioned, there's the black-green version of this deck. I think this is here to kind of mitigate the loss of cards like Vines of the Vastwood. I think that this is here to play that sort of protective role, and also in a pinch against a deck which only has one color of creature out, this can serve as a one-use evasive spell, quote unquote. So I see where you're coming from in the fact that, like, you really do want to be feeding stuff into your sack outlets, but I think that this one serves a purpose good enough that I don't mind it as much.
All right, and it can protect our next card, which is Carrion Feeder, which is a staple of these types of decks. B gets you a 1/1 zombie. Carrion Feeder cannot block. Sacrifice a creature, put a 1/1 counter on Carrion Feeder. So much like the green-black deck, the plan, one of the main plans is to grow your Carrion Feeder.
So I think that I'm comfortable saying that we are never going to see, at least at common, a better version of this effect. I think that just bar none, Carrion Feeder is the best rendition of just, I'm going to get in, I'm going to sacrifice stuff. I think that this is that absolute peak, and it's
better than ATOG.
ATOG, I'd say acts on a different axis, though. Like,
sure.
Like I would not classify ATOG as an Aristocrats card.
That's fair.
But when it comes to like Aristocrats effects, I think that Carrion Feeder is just bar none the best we're ever seeing at common, and I think, if we're being totally honest, one of the all-time greats for this type of creature. And yeah, it just totally makes sense that you'd have 4 of them here.
All right, and then up next, 3 copies of Doomed Traveler. So in our set review, we argued that this was the better of the two between this and Hunted Witness. Doomed Traveler is a 1/1 human soldier for W. When Doomed Traveler dies, you create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. And in our review, we pretty much said that we thought the flying was more relevant than the lifelink. And even then, this card is kind of fringe at best.
Yeah, I mean, Doomed
obviously powerful in this deck.
Yeah, because it's just 2 bodies for 1. It's 1 mana, like, it's fine if your opponent has no blockers to just swing in with the thing. And this has been like a solid limited card in pretty much every format I've seen it in. So I think it's a perfectly serviceable option, and the fact that it's 2 bodies for 1 mana works out great for this style of deck.
All right, that's fair. Yeah, the 2 bodies getting sacked to Carrion Feeder is pretty strong. I think 3 is okay. Up next, we have 3 copies of Fume Spitter, a pig trinket favorite. B gets you another 1/1, a horror this time. Sacrifice Fume Spitter, put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. So acting as a removal spell.
See, here we go. This I agree with your previous point about not being amazing. I do like the fact that it provides a level of security against game 1 against things like Tribe.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's actually a great call. In that case, I like it a lot more.
Yeah, I think like that's a nice upside. I'm not entirely enthused by this. It doesn't do much I feel in like a reasonable amount of matchups. Like, it's good against Delver, it's good against Tribe, but outside of that, I guess it's also good against Elves on certain hands. It can at least make it more difficult for them to do their thing. But I don't know. This just kind of doesn't feel amazing to me as a 3 of, and I wouldn't mind seeing like 4 Doom Traveler and like 2 Fume Spitter. I think you really want to be on the aggro plan here, but I like it as insurance for those matchups I mentioned.
Sure. And then I guess we do have a payoff card for these self-sacrifice creatures. We have 3 copies of Mortician Beetle, B for a 1/1. A lot of 1-drops for 1. 1/1s for 1. Whenever a player sacrifices a creature, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Mortician Beetle. So Benevolent Bodyguard and Fume Spitter synergize pretty well with this card because you can you just grow it by using the card, which is pretty nice. So it's sort of the companion to Carrion Feeder in that regard. But Mike, you mentioned you do not like this card.
I'm not a fan of it just because even with the creatures that can sack themselves, I feel like a lot of the time it's just going to hit the board, and if you don't have one of those self-sack outlets or a sack outlet already going, it's just a 1/1 for 1. And I do worry that this is kind of a win more style card for these Aristocrats lists, in that if you're doing the stuff that's going to make Mortician Beetle absolutely nuts, you were probably already in a pretty solid position. And not having played this list, I don't know, maybe like you just need that extra density of payoff, and it works out well. But to me, my immediate reaction is that this is a little suspect, especially given that there are other options to kind of bolster the Aristocrat count. But we can talk about that when we sort of get more into the list.
After that, we have 4 copies of Sacred Cat. W for a 1/1 creature cat with lifelink, embalm W. So this is actually already kind of like Hunted Witness. You do have to pay the mana later, and you get a token. You still get the token, but you still get the creature. It's just not on death. So I don't know, but we were talking in the pre-show. It is really, really similar.
Yeah, I mean, so this one has lifelink on the front half as well, which is a nice little bit of upside, and you do get to control when the thing comes back. So, you know, against something like Pestilence, it can and Crypt Rats, you can kind of have a little bit of additional value there.
Sure.
But I don't know. So not to skip too far ahead, but there's 18 lands in this deck, and a whole 7 of them, or actually, no, 11 of them produce white, but most of them are ETB tap lands, and I worry that my concern with Sacred Cat would be that you're an 18 land deck. I think you'd prefer. I think you need to decide whether you're going all in on the sacrifice plan, because if you are, I think you just prefer Hunted Witness because it doesn't cost mana and it leaves you with mana to continue casting out stuff to keep getting sacked to Carrion Feeder.
So once Hunted Witness comes out, you would advocate swapping the Sacred Cats for the Witnesses.
I think so. I think that's where I'm going to land on that. It could be incorrect, but I think here my priority would be being as mana efficient as possible.
That's fair. After that, we've got 3 copies of Blood Throne Vampire. This is 1 in the black for a 1/1. Sacrifice a creature. Blood Throne Vampire gets +2/+2 until end of turn. I'm presuming they are playing this over the mini versions of the 3 drops that are 2/2 simply because it is cheaper. You mentioned a low land count. This is the first 2 drop we've seen in the list.
Although still a 1/1. I did actually just notice there's not a single card in this deck that isn't a 1/1.
Yikes, Electrickery.
Yeah.
Well, there's like 1 card in the sideboard.
All right. And then what rounds out this whole list?
4 copies of Squadron Hawk, 1 in a white. Flyer brings you its buddies for a 1/1. And you actually quite liked this card in the list when we were talking about it earlier.
So I think this is the sole reason I went along with talking about this deck, because I think that Squadron Hawk is an interesting take on what white can offer to this deck, because this isn't a deck that gets to run like Brindle showed. So for those unaware, Brindle showed is 1 and a green for a 1/1 that when it dies you get a 3/3. So you get like a massive upside to that. You also have stuff like Blister Pod, which turns into an Eldrazi Scion, which is another one. It's a 1/1 for 1. You get a 1/1 when it dies, and that 1/1 can be sacked for mana. Also enables like all sorts of morbid shenanigans if you have those going on. So I like the fact that this user went out of their way to find something that does not work in the traditional sort of goal of this deck, where it plays a lot of these creatures that replace themselves, whether it be Young Wolf with Undying or Blister Pod or Brindle Showed, any of these sort of effects. I like that they went out of their way and found Squadron Hawk, which kind of does a similar thing. It lets you, it gets more bodies, it just does it on a different way. But I think at the same time, it kind of highlights an issue I have with the deck is, I think Squadron Hawk's a smart call. It just points out that, like, would you personally rather be casting Squadron Hawks or a Brindle Shoat?
Brindle Shoat, I think, is a little bit stronger, just because it leaves behind a 3/3. And you've sort of hit the nail on the head. White is cool, but I think green is a little bit more tried and true. But that doesn't. I mean, white is an interesting way to go.
All right. So what spells are complementing this creature suite?
First up, we got 3 copies of Tragic Slip. B for target creature gets -1/-1 till end of turn. Morbid, that creature gets -13/-13 till end of turn if another creature died this turn instead. It is a pretty good removal spell in Pauper, although a little bit hard to turn on sometimes.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of been a staple in these Aristocrats lists just because they have so many ways to sack stuff. And in this list, the only thing, let me just double, like, you just have so many sack outlets that I feel like Tragic Slip is almost always going to be active, unless you have literally no board. And I think it's just a solid pick here.
Yeah. Up next, we got 2 copies of Unearth. B gets you return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, cycling 2. I personally wish we had a few more of these in the list, as there are no creatures that cost less than that. You know, all the creatures fit into that category, and I just think you get a lot more use out of this stuff. By the stuff, I mean the creatures.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Unearth here. It's nothing revolutionary, but it gets the job done. Like, you are very reliant on having one of the big sack outlets that pumps itself on the board to be able to close out the game.
Up next, we got 1 copy Diabolic Edict. Could get your opponent if they're on Boggles, but also notably has a synergy with Mortician Beetle. Whenever a player sacrifices a creature, you get the counter. Diabolic Edict, for those of you who don't know, is 1 in the B for an instant. Target player sacrifices a creature.
I mean, this is fine. It's a little odd as a singleton, but that's just me.
Up next, we have one copy of Rite of Consumption, which is the kind of the black fling. 1 and a B sorcery as an additional cost to play Rite of Consumption, sacrifice a creature. Rite of Consumption deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target player. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. You did not like this card. I can see an argument for using it, maybe get like 5 points of extra damage off your carrion feeder, but I can't imagine it's much more than that at any given time.
I was gonna say I did when I was down in GP Providence the other month. I did get ranched by this card in a matchup against Aristocrats. Like it can be really good. That said, that was green black Aristocrats, and they had gone absolutely nuts on making a huge creature. I worry that I think you've got to play it right, because sometimes you're just gonna get a free win out of it. But I worry that in this list, it's not perhaps absolutely the most optimal thing you could be doing here. But yeah, you just kind of got to play it. I feel like there's not a way out of that.
And in the vein of odd card choices, Sin's Enlistment, 3 and a white gets you sorcery. You create 2 1/1 white Kitkin soldier creature tokens, and it has a retrace, which means you can discard a land to replay it. The problem is that this deck does not have a lot of lands.
That said, I like it conceptually, right? I like the fact that if you're drawing into extra lands, it is also 4 mana though.
It seems a little bit strange. I do like the idea. It helps you set up your carrion feeders. It helps you set up your mortician beetles, even your bloodthorn vampires. 2 more creatures, that your other creatures can eat. It's pretty nice. But same sort of thing. What is it really doing?
Yeah, it's just
it
doesn't seem.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem like it fits with the rest of what this deck is doing. Like, as we mentioned, like the curve on this thing is like 1 and 2 drops, and then we have this like 4 drop kind of just jammed in here, which in order for it to kind of do its thing where it just keeps being able to recycle itself, you need to hit more lands. It just feels a little at odds with other aspects of the deck.
Right. So that's our spells. Let's get into artifacts. We have 3 copies of the best Pauper equipment. Bone Splitter. It's a 1-drop artifact equipment. Target creature or equipped creature gets +2/+0. Equip 1. Very good in a deck that is an army of 1/1s.
So,
you don't like it.
I don't. It's not that I don't like it. I just think that this highlights another issue I have here with losing green. Because if this deck had green mana in it, what do you think this would be?
Rancor?
Yeah. You want to know what Rancor does that this doesn't?
No.
It gives trample, and like I think the difference there, because Carrion Feeder is a great card, as we've already said. It doesn't matter if your opponent keeps chumping it. Like, sure, it can turn into the Abyss, but for example, I know in the past, like we've seen Boros Monarch run Sen's Enlistment. Sen's Enlistment just brick walls Carrion Feeder for a while. So
this deck also plays Sen's Enlistment.
This deck does also play Sen's Enlistment. And I just feel like with the way this deck is going, it's just there's not that much evasion in here, and that kind of hurts a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Rounding out the cards you can cast are 4 copies of Cartouche of Solidarity, which is W for an Aura Cartouche. Enchant creature you control. When Cartouche of Solidarity enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white warrior token with Vigilance. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. It has first strike. So really in here to create the token, it feels like.
I mean the +1/+1. If you think about it, how much different is this if you have a Carrion Feeder on the battlefield to something like Doom Traveler? It's giving you a body to sacrifice, and it's giving you +1/+1 from the other body. I think this is fine here. I don't see anything wrong with it. Do you want to talk about this land base?
Yep, let's get into it. 1 copy Bojuka Bog for those pesky graveyard decks. 2 copies Evolving Wilds. 2 copies Orzhov Basilica. Good with Sin's Enlistment, maybe not good in aggro deck. 5 plains, 4 Scoured Barrens, 4 Swamp. So this is a deck that I think would benefit heavily from running Ash Barrens and all basics.
Do you think that this is... There's just so few things that you can actually cast off an Ash Barrens if it has to hit the battlefield. I guess that's probably, if you're in that position, like, it's probably not going well anyway, but I would not mind an all basics Ash Barrens, maybe a 1 or 2 of Evolving Wilds. That said, we're very aware that Ash Barrens is a little bit on the pricey side of things. Could be a budget consideration, but I think without any other changes, those Basilicas should become basics. I agree. I think that's just an easy slam dunk. Just like, you want to play your stuff on time. Yes, you have a lot of colored mana symbols in this deck. Orzhov Basilica is not the way to fix into them. I just feel like even if
it's so slow.
Even if these were guild gates, I'd feel better about this.
Wow.
I'm serious. Like, Orzhov Basilica puts you back a land, and I can't see myself in a position where a hand in this deck relies on being able to get Basilica out. It just feels like it's a little bit too clunky in this type of list. And I think you just want to, like, bring everything down, bring it as low to the ground as possible. So I actually took it upon myself to go out and look for some alternate options for this deck while we were sitting here. And I'm going to toss some stuff by you if that's all right with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Martyr of Dusk, 1 and white. It's a 2/1. When it dies, you get a 1/1 vampire creature token with lifelink.
How much does it cost?
1 and white.
For a 1/1.
For a 2/1.
Okay. Don't hate it. It's another good token producer. You like that more than Sacred Cat or Hunted Witness?
I don't know. I just saw it, and it's in the same vein as Hunted Witness. I guess like, is 1 mana worth 1 more power to you?
That's actually tough. I guess you could cut Benevolent Bodyguard and Edict. That might be my first 2 things to sort of take stock of if we were considering another option like that.
All right. Here's one that did not make the cut. Perilous Mirror.
Oh. So, interesting choice. Oh, so go ahead.
So for those who aren't aware, 2 generic mana, you get a 1/1. When it dies, it deals 2 damage to target creature or player.
That's pretty interesting. If there is a way to set that up that you could recur that repeatedly, like maybe if you played, what's that card you love?
Grim Harvest?
Yeah, maybe you play Grim Harvest, but that's too slow also. We're trying to make this into like an aggro deck.
I think even in an aggro deck though, like this is, for lack of a better way to say this, it's like a lightning strike. It's going to deal 2 when it dies. It's going to probably put a counter on something.
That's true.
I think Perilous Mirror would be a solid pick here. And also in that vein, I've got Sparring Construct. It's a generic mana for a 1/1. When it dies, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control.
Oh, I like that quite a bit, actually. You could play that over any of the 1/1s, it feels like, especially the ones I already mentioned. And you would be able to get a lot of value out of it because it's sort of like modular, but for any creature.
Yeah, I think Sparring Construct might be a good call here, just to, again, like, if we're suggesting that this goes to just basics and Ash Barrens, Sparring Construct makes it so that you have even fewer mana problems just by nature of you can always cast this if you have a mana open. There's also the option of Mirror Sire, which I'm not a huge fan of. It's 2 generic for a mirror. It's a 1/1. When it dies, you get a 1/1.
It's 2 generic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, I figured not. Is there anything else here worth talking about? Because
there was one thing I wanted to mention, but it slipped my mind.
Now there's another thing we can talk about. So this has Unearth in it, right?
Right. I was just thinking about that.
Are there other alternatives here? Like, we could potentially run Undying Evil. It's not great on your carrion feeders or your mortician beetles, because if things are going well and you need to save them, it's likely they have +1/+1 counters on them. There's also stuff like supernatural stamina, which is a similar kind of effect where if it would die, it comes back. And then yeah.
I was gonna say I do kind of like the idea of Undying Evil. I think why I like Unearth is that you can cycle it.
I think the cycling's great. I just think that like the deck kind of needs just a little bit more punch to it, because I think like being able to go Undying Evil on one of your token generators. So like I have a Carrion Feeder turn 1. Turn 2, I go Doom Traveler, Undying Evil, my Doom Traveler, swing with a 5/5 Carrion Feeder.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's actually very good.
Like I think that's kind of where I would lean with this list. And like you can do that with Unearth as well. I just think
it's a lot slower.
I mean, it's not even necessarily slower. Like they're the same mana cost. I just think like going in on a slightly more recursive element, so you can keep rebuying these things, which means you need to run less of these effects, which means you can run the better versions of them. Like you can run 4 Doom Traveler and start cutting like your Sacred Cats, so you're not playing something where you have to pay mana for it. You get to just hone in on these specific effects because you have these ways to recur them. Can you think of a way to shoehorn some card draw into this?
Yeah, we could play Night's Whisper, Read the Bones.
I think I'm a pretty big fan of Night's Whisper here. Like, rip 2 cards off the top for 2.
Seems pretty decent. We also haven't really talked about the sideboard yet.
We haven't. Is there anything in particular you wanted to point out there?
Yes. We've got, well, I'll just run through it real fast. 2 Duress, 3 Call Me False Hope, 2 Mana Tithe, 2 Nile Spellbomb, 2 Felidar Cub, which is the one that's a standout. You can sacrifice Felidar Cub. It's a 2/2 for 2. You sacrifice it to destroy an enchantment. 2 copies of Shrivel and 2 copies of Standard Bearer.
Pluses and minuses on this. What do you like? What do you don't?
It just feels a little unrefined. It feels like I understand what these cards are trying to do for the most part, but Mana Tithe is the one that really gives me some pause.
There's another one that gives me a little bit of pause here.
Which one?
I'm not sure I want to play Shrivel in a deck where everything starts life as a 1/1.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's fair.
Like, I think Shrivel's best in decks where it is trying to be a one-sided board wipe, and maybe you lose a little bit of ground with it. But I'm not a huge fan of it here, to the point. I don't like it to the point where I would prefer to see something like Cower in Fear here, even though that's a 3-drop.
And Cower in Fear is all your opponents.
Is Cower in Fear opponents, or is that just an instant? Do we actually have a version of that effect? I'm trying to think. I can't think of one. Is the Elves matchup that bad for this deck?
Honestly, yeah. A Cower in Fear's creatures your opponents control.
Oh, it is.
And it is an instant. Yes. So yeah, I like that a little bit better too. To answer your question, Mike, I imagine the Elves matchup is actually really, really awful for this deck. They're able to flood the board, chump for days, and they have Well-Wisher.
Ooh, yeah. Or Essence Warden, like take your pick. Actually, Essence Warden seems pretty miserable to play against for this deck, just with all the creatures coming in and making tokens when they die. It just seems like a downhill battle.
Yeah, I imagine that matchup's pretty bad. Okay, so the sideboard could use a little bit of tuning. Do like Standard Bearer. Do like Nihil Spellbomb. Even Kami of False Hope's pretty good, it seems, I think. And I like Duress, but yeah, Mana Tithe and Shrivel seem very odd to me.
I'm also like not a huge fan of Felidar Cub. I see what's happening with it. Like I get that it will like proc Mortician Beetle. In a pinch, you can sack it to Carrion Feeder for lethal. I feel like even just running Disenchant might be better. I think this might be kind of a too cute sort of situation. Like, give yourself a little bit more utility at the cost of like not having this neat little interaction. But that's just me.
Disenchant also hits artifacts, which could be relevant.
Yeah, it's if Felidar Cub was just a disenchant with legs, I'd be fine with it, but it's not. I think there's a pretty wide berth there, and the fact that there's no artifact removal on the side when this isn't like a mono black deck where you can't have artifact removal. I just feel like that's a bit of a weak point there. So I guess looking at this list, is this, we've kind of been a little bit down on this. I want to kind of bring this around. We've talked about some possible alternatives. Like, do you think there's merit to exploring this list a little bit further?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the list is neat, and it does sound like we're being a little bit down on it, but you did mention a couple of times you do like some of the interactions. Some of the tech is pretty interesting. Maybe this isn't really an aggro deck. Maybe we're taking the wrong tack on this. For example, could this be a Monarch deck with a big carrion feeder combo finish? Maybe that's not really the way it can go, but maybe there is some unexplored depth to being white-black. Is Hunted Witness specifically going to be what pushes over the top? My argument would be no, but it is an unexplored space in deck building.
Here's a take for you. How would you feel about, you mentioned slowing this down, because we did kind of focus on making this a little bit leaner, a little bit more aggressive. What if we slow this down a little bit? What if we either pick Tortured Existence or Grim Harvest? Like we say, okay, we're just going to go long game. We're going to plan to have Monarch, and we're going to have, like, let's say the 4 Carrion Feeder and a handful of Bloodthrone Vampires. And then maybe we chuck in Pestilence. And that way we have, like, we're going to have something big enough, right? Because Carrion Feeder, if it's doing its thing, is going to be fairly large. I don't know. Like, I feel like I've already lost the line here, but
we lost the deck. Yeah.
I kind of feel like the offering that white has for these creatures that die and leave behind a body, I just don't think keeps pace with the green alternatives. And I think this deck either needs to go leaner to the ground or it needs to go slower. Like, I think it's just currently at that point where it's kind of fighting with itself, where it doesn't really know if it wants to be an aggro deck or a mid-range deck. And I think if it figures that out, I think it's way better.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So that was WB Aristocrats. And for those playing along at home, this list as it stands would be like $9 online. So if this sounds like something that you want to kind of play around with, A, it's cheap. B, let us know. Like, if you look at this list and you're just like, hold on, I know how to, like, polish this up a little bit. I've got the secret spice, the secret tech. Just let us know. Like, I'd love to revisit this if someone kind of put in the person hours to kind of run this through its paces and polish it. But let's move on to our second topic, and one that we've visited in the past. What happened recently, Adrian?
There was a Paupergeddon in Rome, Italy.
Yes, and this one we can't screw up the name of and wonder where Firenze is.
It was in Rome.
All right, so Paupergeddon, for folks who are a little bit newer to the podcast, is I don't even know how frequently it runs. Like, admittedly, the Paupergeddon scene is a little bit disconnected. We hear the results, but it's a routinely run tournament in Italy, and we've looked at it in the past because there has been little bits of spice that we've loved to pick out, and we figured we'd revisit it since another one happened. So let's talk about the people who did well at this.
Yeah, let's first talk about the winner. The winner was Tribe. And looking at the list, Mike, I can see two things that are very interesting to me. The first is the one-of copy of a Johnny's Presence. W gets you an instant. Strive. A Johnny's Presence costs 2 and a white more to cast for each target creature, for each target beyond the first. So you can essentially replicate it. And any number of target creatures gain +1/+1 and indestructible until end of turn.
Huh.
So
That's an interesting one.
Well, it is really interesting, but what is the most interesting about it to me is I feel like Tribe is already really good against like damage-based kill spells. So they really got to watch out for like Fume Spitter, we mentioned that already, or Serrated Arrows, which this does not help against. So what do you think of that?
I'm not really sure. I think I guess my big thing is looking at this list. There's one Apostle's Blessing in the board, and I can't help but feel like Apostle's Blessing usually takes care of what this is doing.
There's also some other spicy stuff in the board. If you want to cover that.
I was going to say.
There's 4 copies of Seeker of the Way.
Oh, boy. I kind of love it.
And there's 1 copy of Dive Down. Dive Down is instant. Target creature you control gets +0/+3 and gains hexproof till end of turn. And now remember, because we're playing Tribe, that's going to be +3/+0.
I like Dive Down. I think if I remember correctly in our review of this is regular Ixalan. In our review of Ixalan, we did bring up that this could possibly be like sort of new tech for Tribe, and I think it fits great here. I'm going to toss this out there. I think I figured out why Johnny's Presence is being played.
Yeah, me too. With 4 copies Seeker of the Way, that's gas.
Also, I would like to just point out very quickly, Dizzy Spell. Dizzy Spell is a 1-mana transmute card. Dizzy Spell won't get Apostle's Blessing, but it sure will get a Johnny's Presence.
Yeah, Dizzy Spell, we actually just covered that recently on our Ravnica Guild.
Yeah. That said, like outside of these like little bits of tech, this is a pretty stock list by and large.
Yeah, but this is what gets me going, Mike. The tech, the spicy tech.
Yeah, and that's why we've covered it in the past. It's why we're covering it today. All right, what else do we have?
Up next, we've got Affinity. A little bit more stock than usual. Not playing Metallic Rebuke noticeably and is on the 2 of Fling, 1 of Temur Battle Rage plan. 2 Gearseeker Serpents is, I think, unusual, at least in what I know of. And then in the sideboard, we have Feed the Clan and Serene Heart, which, pick your battles, and this player picked theirs. And also 3 copies of Kark Clan Shaman, so maybe they were anticipating a lot of elves or something.
Yeah, I mean, Kark Clan does hate out elves pretty effectively, and I mean, for what it's worth, it could also be a little difficult for Tribe to interact with, just because it'll already be on the board, and that deck excels at like interacting with stuff on the stack more so than on the board.
Let's talk about the next list, which is goblins. But this is not your parents' goblins. For example, you will notice there's no Sparksmith, and there's only 1 copy of Mog Raider. And is there even a Goblin Sledder in this list?
Yeah, there are Sledders.
But 4 copies Insolent Neonate to keep the cards coming. 4 copies Burning Tree Emissary, so more like a red deck, mono red deck. 1 copy Goblin Arsonist. When it dies, you have to deal 1 damage to target creature play. That's a little bit more old school. Haven't seen that one in quite a while. 4 copies Goblin Instigator. Haven't really seen that around too much either. And then 3 Intimidator Initiate, which is whenever a player plays a red spell, you may pay 1. If you do, target creature can't block this turn, so keep those beats going. Then if we get into the sideboard, it's all Burn.
Huh.
And Flaring Pain. I guess there's 2 Flaring Pains. But yeah, so it's really not a traditional Goblins list in the way that we usually think of them.
So does this just like pretty much sideboard fully into a burn deck with like some creatures?
That's what it seems like to me. And for our listeners, it's 4 Chain Lightning, 2 Searing Blaze, 2 Flaring Pain, 2 Lava Spike, 2 Reckless Abandon, 3 Rift Bolt. So really a lot of burn.
Yeah, this is super spicy, and I'm kind of admittedly like almost shocked that like I can see Sparksmith not making the cut in this sort of list, but I'm kind of shocked to not see what is that? What's the Curve Topper? Heel Cutter.
No Heel Cutter. It's playing the Intimidator Initiate instead.
It's playing Intimidator Initiate instead, but I'm just going to toss this out there. Why not play both? They're both falter effects, and one triggers the other repeatedly. Like you can dash it out and do it again next turn. Like, yes, I know it costs an extra mana. It's 4 mana. That's a lot for a deck with 17 mountains in it. But this is an interesting one. I'm not really sure what to say about this. Like, I would never expect to see Insolent Neonate, and I think that's in part like the fact that this deck does have a full 8 creatures that don't help Sparksmith at all, I think is part of it. Now
You're right.
Burning Tree Emissary, I've got to imagine though in this list is almost always going to be just 1 mana for a 2/2. And
Intimidator Initiate is just R.
Yeah,
So,
like
never mind.
you can get the Instigator, you can obviously chain Burning Tree Emissaries together, which is the dream. And then Mog War Marshal is a great use for it. I don't know. I kind of dig this. I don't think I could like sleeve this up and do well with it out of the gate, but like this is a neat take on this deck. I'm kind of into it.
Up next, we have Mono White Heroic. Really nothing to say. Looks like a pretty stock list to me, but I don't have a lot of experience with the deck. But it looks like the usual package of heroic creatures, Deathblade Elite, Seeker, and then Pump Spell. So I don't really see a reason to go too deeply into it.
Yeah, this looks pretty darn stock.
After that, we've got Boros Monarch. Notable in this list, 2 copies Seeker of the Way in the main, alongside a Mortuary Mire, and they are playing Leave No Trace in the sideboard, which is pretty good. But other than that, I don't think it's really anything to write home about. The 2 Seekers are pretty interesting. I'm trying to figure out what they have cut. Are there no prophetic? No, there they are. Yeah, I cannot figure out what they have cut for these 2 Seekers.
It looks like they've just kind of shaved numbers all the way down. Don't some lists play more than 1 Prismatic Strands main these days?
Yeah, I think I have 1 in my main and 1 in my sideboard. Our next one is also Boros Monarch. Got a main deck like Trickery. And yes, this one does have 2 Prismatic Strands in the main. 1 copy of Oblivion Ring. Pretty spicy. And then the sideboard, we've got Core Sanctifiers over Ancient Grudge, which I think is what our previous player had. Federico, and this is Mateo. And then we've got Kark Clan Shaman. So their sideboards are different.
Yeah, and I feel like this is one of those decks where like there's a lot of customization options for exactly how you think the metagame's going. And they're pretty minor when you stand back 10 feet, but it can be make or break, right?
Then finally we have, well, not finally, but next we have Francesco, perhaps, is Boros Monarch. And this list has a Faithless Looting in it. So, like you said, 10 feet away looks very similar, but once you start really examining it, gets a lot closer. He also has, so we have 1 per Relic Progenitus in the first deck, 2 in the second, and 3 in the third. So, as they thought that this was going to happen. Also, a high number of Gorilla Shamans across the board, 2, 2, and 3. Pretty interesting. They were expecting a lot of affinity, and 1 did make the top 8, so there you go.
I was going to say also this last Monarch list that we're looking at does have a Core Sanctifiers in the main deck. So I think this looks like a conscious decision that affinity must be a little bit more popular overseas than it is here.
And then finally, we have Blue-Red Tron. And I think this one does warrant a go-through. Do you?
Yeah, and it's a little weird calling this Blue-Red Tron. This is Marasa Tron.
I didn't really look at it too hard.
Yeah,
all right. We don't have to then.
It's pretty typical for what you'd expect. There's nothing here that's really kind of breaking the mold in a major way. I will say that 2 Mystical Teachings and 2 Forbidden Alchemies is pretty all in on that style of like, I need to dig to answers right now. I can only approve of having a crop rotation in there, and I like the return to form with running some Seagate Oracles. But apart from that, like, this is what I expect out of Marasatron. Flame Slash, Exclude, Trickery, Condescend, Capsize, Muldrifter, all these like classic hits that you'd expect from this deck. And yeah, it does what it does, right? This is, even if it's nothing revolutionary, it works.
And then since I think we have the time, let's go ahead and just run through the next 8 lists, which are I'll say them and you tell me if one piques your interest. We got Burn. Then we got Burn.
I'm noticing a trend here.
Then we've got Affinity. Okay, cool. This Affinity list. Whoa. What is going on with this Affinity list?
Is that Muddle the Mixture?
What is Mirror Oppressor?
I legitimately don't know.
It must be Mirror Enforcer. It must be a mistranslation of Enforcer. Mirror Oppressor is not a card.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I could see that. That makes sense.
Yeah. That's okay. We got Muddle the Mixture. Let's talk about that. That's weird. We've got
Preordain.
3 copies of Navigator's Compass. Where do you see Preordain? Oh, I see it. 4 copies Preordain.
Terminate.
What does Navigator's Compass do? It's 1 when it's about to gain 3 life, and then target land you control because the basic land of your choice in addition to its... What? Why would you play that? So you can play Terminate?
Fixing.
I
don't know what I'm looking at here. I was ready to breeze past this, but like Muddle the Mixture was a way to start this. Oh, I see what they're doing. They're leaning into blue so that they can play 4 Gear Seekers.
Oh.
That's why we've got like Navigator's Compass. Oh yeah, they already maxed out on the Prof Prisms, so sure.
Gaining life might be relevant, and it's just 1 mana. You know, one of the problems with Affinity is that sometimes you can't get up to Affinity, and so your turn 1 plays are actually pretty important. So instead of playing the more traditional Flayer Husk, they're just playing Navigator's Compass.
Now, looking at this list, how do you feel about Muddle? Because obviously it's there to snatch up half of the Atog Fling combo.
Which half?
Either half.
Oh.
If you've got one and you don't have the other one.
I thought Muddle cost 1 for some reason.
Nope.
It seems all right.
This is a funky list. And then in the board, like 4 Hydroblast, 4 Pyroblast, 4 Krark Clan Shaman, 2 Reaping the Grave, and 1 Ray of Revelation.
Yeah, pretty spicy.
This is a weird one. I really don't know what to say about this.
Up next, we've got Mono Black. Looks pretty stock. Got an Unmake in there. Siphon Life on the sideboard. Kind of interesting. 2 Unmakes on the board. We've got Zinrovatron.
I'm just looking through this one real quick. This looks pretty much like what I'd expect.
We've got
nothing pops out there. There's a couple of interesting boarding choices. Unwind showed up. The 3-mana negate that untaps 3 lands. I kind of dig that.
Yeah. Up next, we've got Burn again. This and they're all running Get 2 Lava Runner, so we are wrong. Then next up, we got another mono black deck, and this one is interesting. What is Vampire Envoy, for example?
Oh, I know this one. It's a 1/4 with flying that whenever it becomes tapped, you gain a life.
Interesting. And why do you think we're playing that in mono black?
Because it's a flyer that
gains life
that Delver has a big time trouble getting through. It's a 1/4.
Sure. So you shore up your Delver match. Okay. And then pretty stock otherwise. Well, a lot of unmakes.
You know what? I'm just gonna toss this out here before we go any further. Boy howdy, I would love to see this list run like a singleton copy of Viridian Longbow. Like having this thing that when it becomes tapped, you gain a life. I'm kind of into that. Like it's a little bit bad, but I'm kind of into it. All right, what's next? Fogtron. Okay, yeah, this is the Stonehorn Dignitary Tron deck. And this looks again pretty stock. It is running the spicy one of Scour from Existence, the 7-mana instant exile target permanent.
Also, we got Sprout Swarm.
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes you just got to do that. Oh, and it's got Compelling Argument here as its one of its win cons to just mill your opponent out. Okay, so there's some cool stuff here. I've got to admit that blue Affinity deck. What on earth? I'm so perplexed by that. And like clearly it was doing something right if it got top 16.
Yeah, pretty sick.
I was going to say, do we know how many people were actually in this tournament?
Yes, I do. It was 148 players.
Ooh. All right.
So quite large.
Yeah, and these are routinely some of the biggest Pauper events in the world. So I always do like to kind of touch base on these and make sure that people know what's happening out there in the greater world, because these dwarf most of the challenges. But yeah, this is a neat event. I've got to admit that affinity deck though, that's some pure spice right there. The good melange. But yeah, I guess, do you have any other stuff that you wanted to say about these results in Paupergeddon?
You should put them on a link to them on the video, but that's about it.
There will be a link in the description of this video for these results that we talked about. It is in Italian, but most of it's translated.
Yeah, just so that people can see the lists, spicy lists.
Yeah, definitely. All right, cool. Do you want to take us out? You think you got anything else for us tonight, or?
I think I said my piece, Mike.
Wonderful. Take us on out.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you by the support of our patrons, including Tom. Please consider supporting us if you like the show. Check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We would like to remind you for listening to this on a platform with reviews. They're always appreciated as they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or idea for our topic, you can contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to my LGS, Pat's Games, and Mike's LGS, JP Comics, and of course, the ever-musical, ever-talented L. You can find our theme song, Quantitative, and other great tracks over at soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.